Hey friends, welcome to another episode of My Counselor Live. My name is Anna McGuire, and I'm so excited to sit down with my friend Alison Pitts today, who is a part of the MyCounselor.Online team. Alison, I am so excited that you're here.
Yes, thanks for having me, Anna. I'm excited to be here.
So Alison, before we jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, why you love counseling, what you kind of specialize in.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love counseling. Counseling is the kind of thing I felt like I was being a counselor before I was actually being a counselor. It's just always something that's come naturally from inside of me, kind of like it's a calling, not a career for me. And I really, really love working with couples. I think working with couples is one of my favorite things to do, for marital communication, to marital infidelity, to sexual issues and relationships. I absolutely love working with couples. And I've been with the company for about 3 years, and then had some experience before working here with some addiction, substance abuse stuff too. So kind of covered a wide range, but I love all of it.
So cool. I love learning with you and from you because, yes, you have such a unique and healthy approach to couples and things that come up in being in a marriage or dating relationship. So I'm excited to dive into the article that you wrote, which has some to do with couples and dating, but also just individuals at large. So you wrote an article called Fostering Responsibility in Your Sexual Relationship. Now, first of all, there's like a lot of like keywords in here, but I love the title for so many reasons. But one is this word responsibility in your sexual relationship. So tell us what inspired you to write this article, and I guess to title it this.
Yeah. So I think for me, I was noticing, like, I think working with couples who struggle with sexual issues, you kind of come face to face quite a bit with a lot of just really unhealthy myths around sex, sexuality, and sexual relationships, both for individuals and couples. And I kept running into these different myths that were kind of like ruffling my feathers. I was getting a little angry, like, at, if I can be perfectly honest, at some of these myths and how they can be really destructive for marriages, right? Like, I think sometimes, like, there's certain verses in the Bible or certain kind of cultural norms that have been imposed on sexuality in the church that I don't necessarily find to be the most helpful. And sometimes I can't find the verse that says that thing, but for some reason in the culture, we've kind of adopted it. And one of those things is the sense of like, don't deprive each other of sex, right? Like, there's that verse in the Bible that says, don't deprive one another of that, right? Unless by mutually agreed upon for a time for prayer. Okay? I'm completely butchering that verse. So people watching, I apologize. If you Google it, you'll find it. But I think sometimes that kind of morphed into this space where sometimes couples and relationships didn't feel like they had the ability to kind of listen to their own bodies in the context of their relationship and say, you know what, I don't think that that's okay for me right now, or what have you. And so it kind of became this thing where sex in a marriage was obligatory in some way. And so I think my heart in writing this was kind of to speak to those people who had those experiences of feeling like sex was obligatory, either like expecting that from a spouse or feeling like that's a demand that needs to be given, instead of allowing the sexual relationship to be a lot more mutual and free and safe. So that was kind of, I just really wanted to speak to the heart of some of those myths around sexuality and how that plays out in a marriage.
So good. And I love that that's like kind of the angle you're taking it from, is like some of those myths. Like, we can misunderstand or misinterpret maybe some things that scripture does give us instruction for sex, but there's also this piece of what feels safe and right in different moments. So if you could share with us, who is it that you wrote this article for?
I mean, I think I wrote this article for like anybody who
Mm-hmm.
has sexual urges or desires, right? I had written a previous article kind of more specific to like singles who are experiencing their sexuality and maybe feeling a little frustrated about that. Like, what do I do with this? How do I manage this? And this kind of felt like a follow-up piece for maybe couples uh,
Mm,
who maybe are dealing with some of the myths and issues around that in their relationship, that sense of obligation
mm,
on either side. So kind of really wanting to just speak to couples and in that, and
yeah.
the importance of having that sense of responsibility over your own body's desires and urges.
That is so good. And I love that you said this is for everyone, because I pastor, in addition to being a part of the MCO team, I also pastor. And as I was reading the article, it was even helpful. I mean, yes, for me as a married woman, but as, oh my goodness, like, how am I teaching this in my context? So I would agree that it's super helpful for married couples, but it really is for everyone, because you really are helping to speak to some of these ideas that aren't necessarily true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this article, you really do lean into the importance of having healthy sexual responsibility. So walk us through, what are some practical next steps for this?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like when I'm talking about sexual responsibility, just to define that a little bit more, and then I'll get into the practical tips piece, but just the sense of like the sexual urges and desires that we have are good and from God,
Mm,
and that they're our responsibility to kind of manage, for lack of a better word,
mm,
right? That when we have a sexual urge or have that desire that kind of naturally comes forth inside of our bodies, that doesn't necessarily mean that that urge has to be met right then, or that
mm,
our spouse has to meet that urge or need just because we have it right then,
sure.
right? So that sense of sexual responsibility is kind of speaking to how do we manage that in the context of a relationship, and how can that be maybe handled in a healthier way.
Mm,
And so I think in terms of practical tips, the first thing that I always like to encourage people is that those desires are so good and so healthy, right? And there's, I think, so much of why God wired that into us is because it points us to this desire for connection and closeness and intimacy with another person,
mm,
right? And so it's so, so good and so normal that those desires are there, right? And so part of that is just noticing that they're there, right?
mhm,
Paying attention to them, valuing them, and not like trying to squash them down if you are single, or maybe there isn't that sense of freedom and safety in the marriage, but just noticing them and acknowledging them and
mm,
accepting them as good and okay, right?
mm,
And then the next piece is maybe asking for that need to be met, right? It's a very invitational thing, right? If you are married and you notice that need, it's an invitation to a spouse, right? It's invitation to a spouse, not an expectation,
ooh, that's good.
right? And so kind of allowing your spouse then to speak to that, to say like, yes, that sounds great, or you know what, I'm really exhausted, maybe later or tomorrow or something, right? That even if that is deferred or postponed,
Mm,
right? That to maybe like ask yourself the question of how else can I get a need for closeness met, right? So if maybe
mhm,
sexual intimacy isn't on the table for whatever reason at this time, how can we connect in other ways so I can still feel close,
mm,
right? Because that's that urge, that desire, that connection for closeness.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even if you are single too, like what are healthy ways that you can get that intimacy need, that closeness need still met.
mhm,
And then I think on the practical side too is kind of diverting that energy into something else physical, like go for a run, or do some yoga, kind of let your body release some energy in a way that's healthy and safe.
Mm,
Um, so kind of practically, I think that's what I would say.
yeah. But you already leaned into this a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind sharing more about healthy ways to manage a sexual urge when connection isn't possible.
Yeah, I think that's so hard. I think um, if sexual connection isn't possible, I think you would then move to like emotional connection,
Mm,
right? Because it is like that need for closeness is so good, and emotional intimacy can feel really connecting too and can meet some of those needs, right? Like when we connect sexually, oxytocin is released in our bodies. And when we connect emotionally, oxytocin is also released in our bodies, right?
mm,
And so, kind of, if physical intimacy, if sexual intimacy isn't available for whatever reason, move into emotional intimacy and emotional connecting, right?
that's
Even
so
if your
good.
spouse isn't available, a good friend, right, that you can just like talk with or laugh with, that's like safe and that loves you and your partner, right, that you can kind of lean into that type of closeness too, because it's a signpost for all of the closeness, it's a signpost for all of the intimacy, right?
Mm,
And then just making sure you're taking care of your body and still releasing that energy.
that is so good. And I love that you said it is a signpost for all the other connections. Like, yeah, if you can't connect sexually, like you can't be sexually intimate, how are you emotionally or relationally,
Mhm.
connecting to people or even spiritually connecting?
Yes,
That's another form of intimacy. So I love that. And I love that you're talking about this in like a really holistic sense that intimacy, we even say it like this. We're like, oh, I'm going to be intimate with my spouse or we're intimate. And we chalk that up to sex. And
mm-hmm.
intimacy is so much far reaching than just sex. There's sexual intimacy, there's relational, emotional. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, because I mean, like, how I understand God's heart for sex is just this really pure space of like two people bringing their whole selves into this moment where they're just like completely laid bare, right? In so many different ways. It's not just a physical act,
Mm,
right? And so maybe if we expand our thinking and our idea and our understanding of what sex is and what God designed it for, it
mm,
takes the pressure off of
yeah.
those moments where we are connecting sexually in this one specific way, right? It takes the pressure off of that when those urges do come up. It's like, I really just want to feel close to you. And if intercourse isn't the thing that can happen for whatever reason, like how can we still feel close?
Mm.
How can we still bring ourselves wholly together in a moment and have that place of connection?
Allison, that's so good. So, so, so good. And so helpful. And the way that you're sharing it is so beautiful and so God honoring. So, what final piece of advice would you give to people who are listening or watching this conversation today?
Mhm. Yeah, I just want to say like um communicate with your partner, right?
Mm,
Be honest with yourself and about how you're feeling, right? And make sure that in the relationship that you're in, that you're really seeking to deepen intimacy on all the levels with your
mm,
spouse, not just sexually, that you're deepening that intimacy emotionally as well. Uh, so that when those urges come up, whatever the circumstances, it won't be a point of contention in the relationship. It can be something that spurs you on to growth and closeness, no matter what the outcome is.
mm. So good. Thank you so much for not only being a student of this, but a sharer of it, like bringing your wisdom, your knowledge, your your experience with couples and sharing it with us today and writing the article about it in the first place. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
whether you're listening or watching this episode of My Counselor Live, you can read Alison's article. It will be linked in the notes of this episode. And again, the article is called Fostering Responsibility in Your Sexual Relationship. I really enjoyed reading it. So insightful, so practical. And I think you're going to enjoy reading it too. So one thing that I love doing with our clinicians here at MCO and on the MCO Live episodes is talking about a trending topic. And if you've been on social media at all, I've actually seen this written about or posted about, and it's this idea of toxic positivity, which we see this like coming up a lot. We see it being talked about in really just like regular day life, like this like toxic positivity. Can you tell us what is toxic positivity?
Yeah, so toxic positivity, how I understand it, is this relentless pursuit of positivity in the face of any circumstance, no matter how tragic the circumstance is or how like even potentially inappropriate it is, to kind of be positive in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that somebody's coming to you and saying something really awful happened and you're like, well, let's look at the silver lining.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh, my car broke down. Well, at least this didn't happen. And it's like,
Right, at least you
yeah,
didn't explode after. It's like,
yeah.
okay, that doesn't
Yeah.
actually help my situation. I'm also glad I didn't explode, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
To
Yeah.
give us an example. But yeah.
So what are some dangers of this toxic positivity?
Yeah, I think the biggest danger, how I understand it, is just that if we lean only in the positivity in the face of something that's actually really sad, the person that we're trying to be positive with can feel really invalidated and feel like their experience is really minimized.
Mm-hmm.
I think although positivity is like in and of itself a really good thing, there's a sense, like I used the word before, it just doesn't feel appropriate sometimes to be only positive all the time,
Sure.
right? Like the Bible talks about, like, there's that verse that says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn,
Mm,
right? What toxic positivity does is it tries to make the mourner rejoice.
mm.
And that's just not always what's going to be helpful, right? People need to not feel alone in whatever emotion that they're in.
So good. So how should we respond like when we experience this, particularly from someone else?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what comes to mind for me is kind of just the healthy boundary setting in relationships, right? And being able to express needs. So if you are going through something really hard and you have that friend that's trying to be like, just cheer up, it'll be fine.
Mhm.
If you're kind of noticing that that just rubs you the wrong way and that doesn't feel good, I think it would be really healthy to just let that person know, like, you know what, I really appreciate what you're trying to do, but that's not quite what I'm needing right now. Do you mind if you can just be a
Mm,
listening ear here?
mm.
And just express that need and let them know. And if that's not something that they're able to do, then maybe you learn that that person isn't someone that is your go-to and during hard times. And maybe there's somebody that you can have fun with when times are good, but kind of learn the lay of the land in the relationship better as you set those
Mm,
boundaries.
mm. Yeah. So on the flip side of that, what can someone do if they are the one that struggles with toxic positivity?
Yeah, well, for that person, I want to just affirm, like, their heart in that, of just like how much they really desire goodness for themselves and for the people around them.
Mm,
And I would maybe also encourage them to kind of do some soul searching and figure out what's happening inside them that makes it really hard for them to be in those negative emotions,
sure.
right? And maybe give themselves a little bit of permission to kind of say, when things are hard, things are hard.
Mm,
When this thing kind of feels really icky and sucks, like, it feels icky and it sucks.
Mm,
It's okay
yeah.
to kind of acknowledge the reality of that, and practice acknowledging the reality of that. It doesn't mean that you're wallowing there. It doesn't mean that you're stuck there, right? It just means that you're kind of letting the truth be the truth in that moment.
Mm,
And that doesn't mean we're disregarding the strength that you have of being able to be so positive. That's a strength. That's a good thing. It's
hmm.
just knowing when to use it.
Yeah. So good. So good. And thank you for sharing on that and bringing a lot of insight, because I think that we may know, like we might have heard the term toxic positivity before, but the definition and the practicality you bring to it is so good. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Before we close out today's episode, we are going to answer a couple questions that the viewers, you submit to us. So if you've got a question that you would like to have answered, we would love to partner with you and answer that question. And you can submit your questions to MyCounselor.Online/ask. And there's just this little form that you put your question in. And when you submit your question, we will work to answer the question in a future episode of My Counselor Online Live. So, Alison, two questions for you today. They kind of go hand in hand, and they really do build off of what it is that you shared in your article. So, the first viewer asks, I'm 65, newlywed in 2019. My dear hubby leaves me hanging sexually and doesn't seem to know how to please me. I'm losing hope. Help.
Mm, man, I have so much compassion for that. I think that is such a common problem, I think, for women to have this experience, because sexual desire looks so different for women than it does for men.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes for men, there's like a gap there in knowing kind of how to pursue that for a woman. And so, my biggest encouragement, I love that this woman cares and that this woman wants to feel satisfied and have a really great sexual relationship with her husband. That is such a good thing. And I think my biggest encouragement is communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like communication in the sexual space is so, so, so important, right? Like our husbands are not attached to our nervous systems. They don't know what feels good and what does not feel good. Right. And so really taking the time to kind of slow down in that space and really like try to understand what's going on and try to communicate with him what you like, what you don't like, so that you can both be really satisfied in that space.
Hmm. Love it. Communication.
It's
So,
key.
so good.
It's key to
Yeah,
everything.
it is. It really is. And the second question that another viewer wrote in really does lean into kind of that piece of the first one, but really the whole of your article. It says, how can I navigate my sexual urges as a widow?
Mhm. That is such an important question. And my heart goes out to that woman. That is just such a hard situation to be in. And I think like my encouragement for that woman is just really to like seek out healthy emotional connection with people during this
Mm-hmm.
season. I don't know how recently she lost her husband, but if that's really recent, like there's just so much grief there. And we really aren't designed to go through grief alone.
Mm,
We just really aren't designed for that. And so to make sure that her, whoever she is, that her social support is really strong, that she can get that intimate emotional closeness with her supports.
mm,
And maybe even have like a safe girlfriend that she can even express that she's struggling with that too.
mm-hmm.
And also just like, of course that would be a thing. Of course that you would struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
And also just really finding other ways to take care of your body and kind of expend that energy that's healthy and safe and that you feel good about, like yoga or running or something like that. But that's such a healthy urge inside. And
Mm,
But again, that signpost for connection and closeness with someone else.
yeah. So good, Allison. You are just a gold mine of wisdom and insight, but also so gentle. And my pastor said this not that long ago, and it really stuck with me. He said, you want to come as a student, like not as like the sage, so to speak. And you just come with like such a gentle and like the way you share things, it's such like a journey focus. Like we're all in this together. And so I just love that about you. I love the conversation we had today and just the tenderness you shared it with. And conversations like this can sometimes feel intimidating or just odd or awkward, but you just have this ability to share it in such a vulnerable and also relatable way. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate for you for making it easy. So thank you, Anna.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Can't wait to read more of your articles. Again, Allison's newest article that is just submitted or that she just published is going to be attached in today's show notes. So you're going to want to read it. There's also, you're going to find there other articles that have been written by other MCO clinicians. Again, a great library, a great resource for you. These are practical articles, things that you can apply and work through right now in your everyday life. So thank you so much for watching or listening today. Wherever you're listening or watching, we're grateful for you. I want to encourage you to submit any questions that you would like for one of our clinicians to answer. You can do this at MyCounselor.Online/ask. Again, MyCounselor.Online/ask. Fill out the form, put in your question, and we will work to answer your question in a future episode. Also, we are all over social media. You can subscribe to our channel and follow us on different platforms. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/lovemycounselor. You can find us on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is lovemycounselor. And then you can find us on YouTube, where there is a huge library of videos, and that is youtube.com/MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. Friends, this has been so much fun, and we will see you next week for another episode of My Counselor Live.